social worker and I do social services here and then mental health too. So with the home care nursing, I'm more involved with these kids just because you're all in the home and we're seeing maybe extra issues or different issues. We are, with a lot of our current families, we've actually unfortunately had to report a lot to vulnerable adults and child protection. So we just thought this is a good time to meet and discuss different things. So. Okay, so here are some of our objectives. I hope everyone has the presentation. Does everyone have one? Has it gotten around?
Anyone need one of these?
So in my mind, we're talking today about abuse, signs, symptoms, how to report, what to report, different things. Oftentimes I automatically talk about child abuse, but it's also vulnerable adults. So if I'm talking about child abuse, no, I'm also meaning vulnerable adults, okay? So what is child abuse? Child abuse is when a parent or caregiver, whether through action or failing to act, causes injury, death, emotional harm, or risk of serious harm to a child. There are many forms which we're going to go through. And then a vulnerable adult is any person 18 years of age or older who, regardless of where they live, is unable or unlikely to report abuse or neglect without assistance because of their mental or physical function or emotional status. So basically, any patient you guys are working with, they're vulnerable. So if we have concern, we're going to make a report, most likely. Or make a report to us, and then we can go from there. So what's physical abuse? I feel like most people know physical abuse is most readily available. It's things that we can see, bruises, marks. Sorry, I'm going ahead of myself. So it's when a parent or caregiver causes any non-accidental physical injury or threat to harm. 28.3% of adults report being physically abused as a child. So I think that's kind of significant. Okay, so here I'm talking about cuts, bruises, burns, grip mark, black eyes. We're not talking about, everybody knows the kid, all my nieces and nephews, you know, knee down to the ankle, fully bruised, ear bruised. That's typical child play. It's the grip marks under the arm, back, butt. Those are more of the concerns. Sometimes black eyes. You guys need to use your assessing skills because sometimes with medical treatment there might be, you know, lesions, bruises, marks from their medical complexities.
Can you clarify threat to harm? Because that sounds verbal as opposed to...
Right. That we have to be careful of too because you hear about parents might say, I'm going to whoop you. That's a cultural norm for many families. So that would be maybe a sense, but it would depend on the situation. But we all have case managers, we all have coworkers that we can talk to about that. So if you're really concerned about it, you can call it in. All right, so, sorry, getting on the same page with you guys. So just so you guys know, parents can slap their kids, parents can spank their kids. It's not illegal, it's not something that we need to report. Is it super uncomfortable if you're in the home and you hear a child being slapped? 100%. I hope you don't have that situation. We've had that situation. They can do that. They cannot use, or you as parents, cannot use belts, whips, sticks, any tool to do that, and it can't leave a mark. So if you hear it, you don't necessarily have to go and look, but if you're seeing, I think in like that situation, it would be another child, not the child that you're working with. But if you see that other child and their pant leg goes up and you see a mark like a day later, that could be reportable.
So as far as the slapping goes, if it leaves a mark, is that considered?
Not like a mark an hour, but maybe a day later if
Okay.
there's something there, yeah. So all these like, just because it's really uncomfortable, I mean, it's just like, parents don't do it, okay? But that's not how it works, so. And again, you can always call us. Sexual abuse, this for you guys, I mean, it's good for you guys to know. It's gonna be hard to assess. You don't have to assess like, oh, it's emotional abuse or sexual abuse. This is just for your knowledge, the different types, okay? The subjection of a patient to criminal sexual act or threatened act by a person responsible for the patient's care or by a person who has a significant relationship to the patient or is in a position of authority. It also includes when a child who is older or more powerful uses another child for sexual gratification or excitement. So some of our vulnerable adults are in a vulnerable situation where they could be in a form, same with our kids. I mean, all of our kids are vulnerable to that. 20.7% of adults report being sexually abused as a child. So some physical signs of sexual abuse are rare, but some things that might happen, again, you're dealing with medically complex kids who might be having this. It doesn't mean they're sexually abused. So, but for a typical child, maybe they're having these things, then it's a red alert for caregivers. Pain, discoloration, bleeding or discharges in genitals, anus, or mouth. Persistent or recurring pain during urination and bowel movements. Wetting and soiling accidents unrelated to toilet training. So I see this in your guys' reports, but it doesn't give me a report that it's sexual abuse, just because of the type of kids you're working with. Behaviors you might see, again, some of these behaviors I see in your reports too, and I'm not concerned by it. It would be other things that we'd look at too. Nightmares or other sleep problems without an explanation. They're distracted or distant. Has a sudden change in eating habits. Maybe they're eating a lot more. Maybe they're not eating anything. So there might be a change in that. Sudden mood swings, rage, fear, insecurity, withdrawal. Develops new or unusual fear of certain people or places. So maybe they were interacted with a person well at one point and now they're not. So maybe something's happening. Resist moving clothes when it's appropriate, and maybe they didn't have that resistance before. Wetting, soiling accidents unrelated to toilet training or medical. Emotional abuse, a pattern of behavior that attacks a patient's emotional development and sense of self-worth. Most often, emotional abuse is a pattern of behavior that causes damage over time. I'm surprised by this 10.6. I would think it's a lot higher of adults report being emotionally abused as a child. I think it's more significant.
It's amazing to think 20% was sexual abuse.
I know.
10% emotional.
I looked at those numbers like a couple times because I'm like, that's not what I know to be true.
And that's only what's reported, so some people might not know that they were emotionally abused in order to report.
Right.
Or choosing
But
not to report.
if you look at statistics, usually sexual abuse isn't reported as often.
Yeah.
So, and then if you talk to people, like in general, most people have said that they've been emotionally abused at some point in time, so that 10%. I didn't do that study. So signs of emotional abuse, constant belittling, shaming, humiliating, calling names and making negative comparisons to others, telling a child or vulnerable adult that they're no good, worthless, bad, or a mistake, frequent yelling, threatening, or bullying, ignoring or rejecting as punishment, giving them the silent treatment. Limited physical contact with the child, no hugs, kisses, other signs of affection, exposing the child or vulnerable adult to violence or the abuse of others, whether it be the abuse of a parent, a sibling, or a And emotional abuse for you guys, I mean, you might hear that. It's hard to report. So in one situation, we might not report it, but maybe if there's a history of it, if there's a couple different things that you can send us, then that's something, a bigger report. Neglect, it's when a parent or caregiver does not give the care, supervision, affection, and support needed for a child, vulnerable adult's health, safety, and well-being. Neglect includes physical neglect and inadequate supervision, which might be supplying food, clothing, shelter. Emotional neglect would be protecting the patient from conditions or actions that may endanger the patient. We're going to get more in depth with medical neglect. And then educational neglect would be a failure to take steps to ensure that a patient is educated according to law. With our kids, it's going to look different. It's not going to look the same as like a typical child who's going to school Monday through Friday, 8 to 3, whatever school hours are. Some signs of neglect. So like emotional abuse, neglect, it's often a pattern of behavior over time. It's not just one incident. So if you're sending us something and you're getting frustrated with us, it's usually this pattern that we need in order to report. There's no typical neglectful parents, but if you see some of these signs listed down here, it might indicate that a parent might need additional help. So if they're displaying an indifference or lack of care toward the child, the parent is depressed, they're using drugs or alcohol, might have other mental health issues, they might deny problems with the child, or they're blaming the child for their problems. They might view the child negatively or relying on the child for their own care and well-being. A lot of our reports from my history here have been against the neglect. It's not been about physical or sexual abuse or emotional abuse. I've actually looked at my history of reports that I've done, and they're all kind of file into this neglect. So medical neglect, this is kind of where your eyes and ears are all over the place. So failure to provide necessary medical care means refusal, failure to seek, failure to obtain, or failure to follow through with necessary medical care if there's a serious risk to a child or a vulnerable adult. Some examples of medical neglect would be not taking the child to the hospital or appropriate medical professional for serious illness or injury, keeping the child from getting their needed treatment, not providing preventative medical and dental care, and failing to follow medical recommendations. So if a family is doing these things due to their culture or religion, there's a difference. But if it's not a religious or cultural viewpoint that's keeping them from doing that, then it's reportable. So we can talk about that if there's ever an issue. So when we have to report medical neglect to a county, they're looking for 3 things to open a case of medical neglect, and it would be identification of the medical problem or condition that needs attention, and the identification of recommended interventions, identification of serious risks to a child's physical or mental health if the child's not receiving that medical treatment, and then documentation of parents' failure to provide the needed interventions. So who's a mandated reporter? If you're in this room, you are a mandated reporter. So it's professionals who work with children and families in a key position to help protect children from harm. So Minnesota law requires professionals and their delegates who work with children to make child protection report if they know or have reason to believe a child is being neglected or abused or has been neglected or abused within the past 3 years. So I haven't heard that for you guys, but like for me in mental health, if I was working with somebody and they were talking about being abused a year ago, I would have to report that. I don't know about, maybe it would happen, but if they were having a conversation with you, if they were talking about abuse, give me a call and we can talk about that. We would need to report it, so past 3 years.
Do you know why it's only 3 years?
You can do beyond that, but the law is within 3. I don't know why 3. So it includes professionals and delegates, so anyone in healthcare, anyone in the school district, anyone in social services, mental health, group home, foster parents, they're all mandated reporters. So if you're working with childcare education, so if you're working with anybody and they're having a concern about the child you're working with, about a issue of abuse, and you're not witnessing it and it's not in like the home you're working at, let them know that they're mandated reporters and they need to contact their delegates or their county. So you don't have to report that because we really want to try to do first person reporting. So if you're at a foster home, if you're at a group home and they're having issues with their employees, they need to report it.
Monica,
Yes.
what if a group home employee refuses to report? What is our responsibility to report the reporter?
It would depend on the situation and we would talk. If we really felt there was something going on, we can make the report. They oftentimes aren't going to take a third, fifth person report. The thing is, if something were to come up, they're going to get in trouble. Like if they take our third person report and it's in their best interest to make the report if something happened. So, I mean, we can't hold their hand to do it, but if we felt like maybe it's something happening, then we would make a report. Whether or not they take it, I don't know. All right, so what happens when a report is made? So many times I'm frustrated because we'll have something and they don't take it. But we still have to do it because here we just went over all of the signs and symptoms of different stuff. They might not take it, but it doesn't mean that we won't report it. For them, they have a threshold that the report has to make. So that's why they may or may not take it. So we might report it, they're not going to take it. We might get new information, report more information in a week, and then that might be enough for them to take. So you just kind of keep reporting.
Does CPS keep a running file of reports that were not accepted, so they have all the previous information?
Well, because sometimes you can call and they won't even take it, it won't go in their computer. So not necessarily. But if it's something they take and then they don't open, yes. So just because you call, they're not going to take it. Some counties take every report. So that's what's so hard. Every county is different.
Some counties will send you a letter if they didn't open a case on the report.
Yeah.
too.
But sometimes you'll just call and say this is the situation. They won't even write it down. So then they wouldn't have that law. Sandy, did you have a different question?
No.
Captured it? All right. So we just keep making reports. If a report is accepted, they'll go through and it'll go, excuse me, either into family assessment, investigative response, and if it goes to either one, we continue to make reports. So if something new is happening, we'll make another report. So each time there's an incident, hopefully there's not, but sometimes families just really need help, and it's just oozing out, and you're seeing it every time you're on a shift. So
regardless, the report is on file, though, whether it's accepted or not. They do, once you report, they have to have record of it regardless?
So if they do take it, even if they accept it or not, yes,
It will be
on.
on record,
Yes.
okay.
Because she's saying sometimes you will call with the report and they won't do anything with it, and then it won't be on record.
Right.
Oh, really? So it wouldn't even be on record that you called at all?
Right. So sometimes it's like, there might be something, and so I'll just say, let's call, let's see, like, what are they gonna do? Because it's better to call, for us to say, let's call, and then they can take it or not, than us not doing it, and if they would take it.
So I had to make a report not too long ago, and they were saying, well, if we don't accept it, we'll send out a letter. So even if they send out letters, that's still not on file.
No, so it's confusing, I'm sorry. So I might just call to say, hey, this kid has a black eye, I'm not sure how it happened. They might say, it could be 1,000 different things you don't know. We're not even gonna do it. But then I might call and say, they have a black eye, this happened. They're gonna take it, and maybe they're not doing anything with it. That would be reported. That would
Okay,
be unfair.
that's my concern, is that it's just going to nothing.
No, for the most part, yes, but sometimes we just call to say, we're not sure what we should do with this.
Sure.
Does that clear it up a little?
Yeah, and on our end then too, there's a record that we've done something about it
Yeah.
to cover our license and
Yep.
our.
Yep, yep.
We keep a record, so you don't have to worry
Right.
that there's no record. Whether
Right.
child protection keeps one or not, we have a record.
We don't put any of this in CPR class though, just so you guys know. If, we can talk about our concerns we're having, but we're not saying, called CPS, they're doing this. It should be, oh my gosh, confidential. Like, I just lost my word. It should be confidential. Many times parents can deduct who reported it, but not always, so.
Okay.
Kathy, you had a question?
Well, I just had a comment, and I
Yeah.
have, been following with interest this
Yeah.
information about what's going on in the state, and it sounds like they're not really allowed to look at previous reports. That's changing now, but they haven't quite implemented it.
Right.
So it sounds like each report is a brand new report,
And I've seen that, but in my history, that's not how it works. I feel like if there's been a few reports, they'll do something more. So sometimes I report it and I'm like, I don't think they're gonna take it, but we're gonna report it. And they take it, and they're like, oh, we don't always know what else is going on. We don't know who else has called or different stuff. So I've seen that too, but in my experience, that's not what I've experienced.
So when you report it, is it to the county that the person lives in?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll help you with that. So I'm gonna go into how we report with PHS, so you're not doing any of this on your own. So we're gonna get into more what a family assessment is and investigative response. So an investigative response, it's designed to respond to the most serious reports of harm and neglect to children. So some of the stuff that I was talking about, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, it's most likely going to be an investigative response. Reports of child maltreatment that allege substantial child endangerment must receive an investigation. Investigations might be conducted with law enforcement as part of a police investigation. It's super intimidating if you end up getting pulled into an investigation, but we are here to help you. So we will walk you through that. The focus centers on gathering facts and assessing family protective capacities related to child safety. Family assessment, it's the preferred response. It's typically the response that if a report is open, that most families go into. It's not involving the substantial child endangerment. It's more about like those neglect cases I was talking about. It engages the family. It's looking at their resources, community resources. The family agrees to a plan. If the family is not working through the plan or in their evaluation of like child safety, risk of subsequent child maltreatment, it might move into investigative, but a lot of times it starts in the family assessment. And like if the family's not engaged in doing what they need to do, it might move over. So some of us have been working with a guardian ad litem, and we wanted to just let you know what that is, it's court-appointed advocate for children involved in court proceedings. They represent the best interest of the child and gives recommendations to the court about custody, visitation, and support. So they are there to support the child. They're not there for mom's interest or dad's interest, foster parents' interest, adoptive parents. It's all about the kid. The court is required to appoint a guardian ad litem if it has any reason to believe a child is the victim of domestic child abuse or neglect, or any case involving custody and visitation. So depending on how bad a divorce might get, guardian ad litem might get set up. And they're appointed by the court. What do? They act only on the behalf of the child. They're an advocate to the child. They might attend meetings with other professionals, so that would include us or any other healthcare professionals. It might be a part of their assessment of what this child needs. They will outline options and make recommendations. They facilitate information between parties, attorneys, and professionals. So they take our information, doctor's information, education information, and kind of pull it together. And then they monitor different relationships that the child has. Oftentimes, guardian ad litems might get paid, but often they have another job too. So it's volunteer. Like when I was going to get my master's, I had a classmate who was a guardian ad litem. Or I know one of my friends, when she was going through law school, she was a guardian ad litem. Oftentimes they're professional as well and doing it. So they're not allowed to enforce a court order, act as a mediator, or put any party's interest ahead of the child. So if the family isn't following the court order, they need to report back to the court saying parents aren't following the plan. So that's how I guess they would mediate it, but they're not saying, Mom, you're supposed to do this, or Dad, you're supposed to do this. So, just so you are aware of that.
So do they do like frequent visits with the child?
So before, and it's before like custody gets settled or whatever the situation might be. They're meeting with schools. They might meet with the child. And it depends on the age.
Right.
So their assessment is going to change depending on the age of the child and their needs.
If the child is assigned a guardian ad litem, what is our obligation in communicating with them?
We can talk to them. They have to send us the court, or like I don't remember what Cameo has a name for the letter. So we just need proof that they are who they say
Appointed
they are.
to that person.
What's that?
That they're appointed to that person,
Right.
so court documents.
So court document. So then we can then talk to them. So a nurse in the home, if they're coming and talking to you, I wouldn't talk to them until you know that we have it and touch base with the case manager.
So do we report everything that we would report to CPS and then report it to the guardian ad litem as well, or is it?
It would depend on where they are with the court. If that's a situation that we know, we can. Every situation is so different, so it's really hard to be black and white. So there's a team, and we can come up with a plan. From history, I would say if a new issue happened, you would still report it to CPS.
But would you also share that information with the guardian?
You could. Most likely, yes.
You know, while she's going through all this, for all of you who are in the home or might be frontline, please, nurses can be able to, call the office. You can ask to speak with Kathy Welke, myself, Chris Ludeman, who's going to be family liaison supervisor, so supervisor of the CN, you can talk to your primary CN. You don't have to be out there and say, okay, what did Madeline say I should do in this case? Monica, sorry. What did
You can come up here. Go ahead, here.
Monica is also available for calls. She's getting really busy with her play therapy right now, so not as available, but any of us can help you. And it's not just, call if you have a question, but we want to be in the loop and need to be in the loop. So if you're thinking there's something you need to report, call and talk to your CM, talk to Chris Ludeman, Kathy Welke, myself, talk to somebody, and we can talk it through and make sure we're following the appropriate plan of action. So.
All right. So medical foster care is the least of my knowledge, unfortunately, with all these topics. So we have lots of people we can use their history too. Unfortunately, this is something that maybe I will be gaining more experience with, but I know that we do have kids in medical foster care, so I definitely wanted to address it. What I do know about medical foster care is that some parents choose to put their child in foster care. So maybe there's not anything happening with child abuse and neglect. Like, they just know that with their skill set or with the child's needs that they can't do what they need to do. And so they will choose that, and that's an option for them. On the other side, maybe things are happening and it's not in the best interest of the child to be at the home. And so it's the court, the county is choosing to put the child in foster placement. So there might be a difference. We treat the families the same. Every family is different. So sometimes families are able to be totally available and a part of their child's care and work well with the foster parents. Other times, there's not. And a lot of times it's somewhere in between. So it's not black and white. So it's so hard, social service and all of this, it's not one thing. You got the county and their rules, and then you have family situations too. Any other experience that you would share that, Sandy, do you have?
I have, we follow a little kiddo for occasional respite, and he was born to a young couple, I believe in North Dakota, and his medical care was so complex that they surrendered to a medical foster family in the cities to be close to all the medical care, because they just knew they could not give him what he needed way out there, so.
We have another one where the child will, unless something we don't anticipate happens, we'll go back with mom. It was just right now, child was not thriving in the home situation, and they thought they need to give a child a chance to kind of catch up and be stable and healthy, and also in this case, mom a chance to kind of work on some of the skills. There were feeding issues involved with this mom. Some of you here, I don't know, might even be involved in the home. Child goes home once a week, and nurses go with, and just learning some of the things she needed to learn to help the child thrive. So we fully anticipate a temporary situation, and the goal is when you talk child protection, the goal is always to keep families together, and can you provide the supports necessary to make that happen. So sometimes it's totally voluntary, and where if we need to get approval on something, parents are still involved, sometimes it's not as voluntary.
Yeah. So it might be really contentious, it might be really friendly. Yeah. No matter what, we are PHS, will provide good customer service. Don't treat either family any different. That's beyond our scope.
CPS is also required to provide the closest setting to the child's home setting in medical foster care. So say a client is of different ethnicity or language, they're required to try and find, so say they only speak Arabic, they're required to look through all of their Arabic medical foster homes before they can look at any other language. Or if they're of a certain ethnicity, they're required to look at all homes, medical foster homes of that ethnicity before they're able to look at other ethnicities and stuff like that, so that the child has the closest environment to what they would have at home first.
And medical foster homes, there's not as many as like, I mean, foster care is hurting right now anyway. And then medical foster care and having the competent care gets even more challenging. You can imagine.
Are kids who get placed in medical foster care, are the foster parents required to have medical knowledge or any sort of skill?
It needs to be a safe care plan. So whatever they decide, I mean, depending on the situation, if it's 24-hour nursing, it might look a little different, you know, but if they're doing the cares, they have to be able to have a safe care.
But clarification, if you were thinking like, do they have to be like a nurse or someone with clinical
Right,
education?
or past
No,
experience or anything?
they can just be trained.
Yeah.
You know, and
And
we-
have a willingness to do that, yeah.
We don't deal with it as frequently, but our team not infrequently with very little notice, they'll hear some child being put in a medical foster home and now they gotta hurry out there and train them on the equipment, so.
From my,
No, they could be just regular folks who then will be trained on the care as necessary for the
from my
child.
experience, there's like certain families. I mean, if you hear like, oh, this family might go into medical foster care. Oh, are they going to this home, or this home? Like, this, with our placement and our kids, like, there are certain foster homes that we already work with that have trained.
I would say a lot of
Yeah.
them that I've heard of, they already have multiple kids that they're doing medical foster
Yeah.
care with, so.
Yeah. Jeannie, did you have something to add? Okay. Perfect. Okay, so our process of reporting, we have an M-Files document, it's 381. Steve's gonna pull it up. So lots of writing, it's a lot of stuff we've already covered. It talks about the document, the definition of vulnerable adult, every child's vulnerable. But then it talks about the different types of reports, or the different forms of abuse, if you want to scroll to the next slide. And then it just will walk you through what we need to do. A lot of this stuff we do in the office, and then we'll call you, we'll bring you in, and you'll be a part of it. But that's for you to reference as needed. So if you have a concern, so we have lots of different things that are floating in my mind. So if it is a red flag, like right now, if they're in imminent danger, you're in imminent danger, get out of the house, call 911. If it's a concern that needs to be reported, like, you know, in your heart of hearts, like, this has to be reported, call your case manager, any case manager, right away, because a report needs to be filed, a verbal report needs to be filed 24 hours. So don't wait until the end of your shift, because then we don't have time to do the legwork that we have to do to get it in, okay? If it's concerns, like most of the concerns we have, if it's neglect, they're all important, but like I said, it's not a one-time thing. It's 10 things, and then we'll make a report. Get it in, email it, call your case manager, get it in, and then we will deal with it. It's kind of gray, but make your best judgment. But if it's something that is like gnawing at you and you're thinking about it, call it in.
And you know 24/7 you've got support. So if you don't know for sure what your best judgment is, you call the clinician on call. That clinician on call, if they're going, oh, I'm not sure either, there's a manager on call 24/7. So you know, don't think you always have that support. You know, another thing with what Monica said that I think sometimes it's hard for people, if there's a situation in the home that isn't safe, say one of the adults is intoxicated and has a gun or is threatening or whatever, and you think, I can't get myself and this baby out of here, what do I do? Who knows what the appropriate answer is? So if you're caring for a child but there's no way you can safely get both of you out of the home, what do? You leave yourself. And a lot of times that's hard for people. What do you mean I leave the kid? You leave, and then as soon as you're in a safe place, you call 911 immediately. But in that situation, you know, you just need to get out of it and you need to call 911. So even if that means you're leaving a patient in the home, and I think that's really hard sometimes for nurses, but.
In my history, that hasn't happened, but
Right.
things have been crazy. So who knows, let's hope that doesn't ever happen. Yeah. So if we do make a report and it's something specific that you're seeing, we would work with you to make that report together. The best report is a first person report. If it's like neglectful information and it's a history, it's easy for me, it's not ever easy for me, but it's easier, I don't have the medical history, and so I always pull in a case manager because they can talk about the medical. It's easier for us to work as a team to make the report, but if it's something specific that you noticed or witnessed, we'll pull you in somehow. If you're sleeping because it was over a night shift, we will work with them, we'll get the report in, and then if they need to talk to you too, we will get the case manager's number at the county, give it to you, and then we can call together, or we would make arrangements with you to make that report. We wouldn't give them your number, so we're getting their information, and then we work with you to call. We will counsel you through it. If it's the first time, it's super nerve-wracking. As I've done it, it's like, well, let's just do it and see what happens. Oftentimes, it's really for the best of the child. We're not doing it to be vindictive. We're not doing it, because we want the parents to get in trouble. It's really about taking care of the child. With all these changes in legislation, there's a change in how they're doing reports and how they're responding. So, they're taking action, and it's good. I think I've seen our families gain a lot of resources and help from us reporting. So I don't feel bad about it anymore.
It's hard to, I think, sometimes to report because you don't want to jeopardize the relationship you
Right.
have with whomever the caregiver is. But you do need to report, and it's in the best interest of the child. Like Monica said, there are so many resources that they'll have available to them that so frequently the family figures out to make a report. That's reality. There's enough information shared if they investigate it, even if they don't open it, that happens. And yeah, they might be mad at you and you may not work in that home anymore at their request, and you can't control that, but you still need to do the right thing. So, so don't let that, I don't want my mom to be mad at me, I need to make it help more if I am in the home. Don't let that cloud your decision making.
You are a mandated reporter. If it is something that they see and you didn't report, you can get in trouble. So just remember that trumps other things.
If it's a case of neglect where it's more than just a one-time instance and multiple nurses are seeing it, is that multiple reports? Or
No.
would you do a
So you just
continuous
set it and
basis?
then we keep it.
And you do it as
And
one
then,
report?
because one time it's like, like
Right.
everybody makes a mistake. Sometimes, a lot of times, you might get a red flag and then I'm talking. So oftentimes, I'm always involved. I might not actually make the report, but I will counsel and work with, we'll work together. Sometimes it's like, oh, we should make a report, but we'll talk about it. And it's like, is it an education thing? Is it a cultural thing? So I think so many times we all go right to reporting, take a step back. If it's a neglectful thing, is there things that we can do to help? If we've done those interventions and they're not working, they're not listening, then it becomes an issue.
I'm thinking as far as like our licenses, if multiple nurses witness like an
Yeah.
incident, are we all on the same report then, or would that be?
When we do like a neglect report, it's not specific
Okay.
nurses. It's really, we're just doing it
Okay.
for PHS, and our nurses have seen it. If it becomes an investigation, which we've had, super intimidating because here comes the sheriff and the child protection worker, and the sheriff's got a gun in their pocket, I'm like, ah. We will work with them, and what we've had to do is have them come here. They've worked with us where they can come here. We will gather the nurses, and then they will interview the nurses. And they're not looking at you and your care, they're looking at most likely parents, right? They're looking at the parents, and so they're gonna ask questions. When I've done it, I've been able to sit in there, so maybe we don't know each other, but I'm a PHS support, and I'm not saying anything. I don't know what they're investigating. A lot of times, we have no idea. And in that investigation, we didn't do the report, but they knew we were involved. So we weren't in trouble, they were just gathering the facts. So we try to be as supportive to you as possible, because it is frustrating, and they've worked with us, they get it. So let's hope that doesn't happen anymore either. And then call 911, so that is what we do. I can't tell you, nope, don't report. I mean, you're seeing it, depending, like if it's a physical abuse or maybe something neglectful that's really standing out to you. Sandy can't tell you, no, don't report it. I mean, you are the eyes and ears out there, so you might have to verbalize to us. But
We can counsel you, but
Yeah,
if you
not everything-
disagree with what we say, no,
You
I
have
think
to
this has
say.
to be reported, report it.
And sometimes I might say, well, let's think about this, and then that's the education and the cultural, and then it's like, oh yeah, no, I didn't think about that, and that feels okay to you, verbalize that. Or if you don't think that that's what it is, it doesn't hurt to make a report. And like I said, sometimes they don't accept it, sometimes they'll say, we need this, this, and this, and then you've done your diligence.
But it also might be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Absolutely.
We have no idea what they have.
Yeah, yeah, but
So
I'm
that's
not.
why if you call us, we document that, so we keep the information. I know, I think the most recent time I was involved with Monica, and we called one in, there wasn't one single thing that Monica felt was reportable, but there were 5 of them. So then you take 5 things, and so then you say maybe it's a picture that we're gonna report, so.
Okay, so some examples, we'll go over these quick because I want you guys to have time to ask questions too. So I just went through some of my history. I'm not using anybody that's on our services right now, and they're not all HCN patients, but just for a history for you guys, what I've had to report. So there's a male child. He has a food pump and a suction machine. I met with mom, and there's no hot water, no electricity, and no heat. This was in May. So it looked different, right, if it was in January. But it was in May, and so they were able to do something. Lots of issues in the home, but this was a huge. Worked with her to figure out resources. Her bills were like $4,000–5,000, so it wasn't anything that was going to get fixed anytime soon. Not a safe care plan for this kiddo with the suction machine and cleaning supplies and all that stuff. And so I was able to let mom know I needed to make a child abuse report. She was open to that. It ended up being a family assessment, and then they were able to get community service, and so it helped the family. But it's just beyond where the parent was. They were way over their heads, and it wasn't safe for the kid. So that was one. We had a female child with a seizure disorder. When the nurse came on service, she came in, noticed that the child was sitting in the bathtub with water up to her shoulders, alone, unattended. So not safe, right? So she could have a seizure and something could happen. So we were able to call that one in. Family knew who made that report and ended up leaving their services. We still have to make the call. I mean, it's not safe. And this wasn't one incident, there was several unsafe behaviors that parent was choosing to do. It was beyond education, it was beyond talking. This was the straw that broke the camel's back, you know, that we made the report and cut ties, and okay, we still have to do what we do. Female child with ongoing medical and feeding concerns. This is supposed to be guilt, sorry. Mom reported feelings of guilt, hopelessness for herself and her child. She just didn't think that she was going to do anything for her child. She didn't think her child was going to get better. Social worker asked parents if mom intended to hurt herself or the child, maybe suicide or homicide, just checking things out. She denied it. We made a call to CPS, and we notified the doctor. So that was one of the neglect things that we are looking at and concerned about when it happens. And then he's not one of our HCN patients. He's an adult male, 24-hour vent patient. He called me frantic. He had a family member who's not a caregiver, not trained, but there was a nurse in the home and they thought he was drunk. And so he was like, Monica, like, help, like, my person's not available to help me. Passed out, all this stuff. So I hung up with him. He was with his uncle, so that was okay, but like those are one of the times where you see me like running around, like get out of my way. I hung up, called the nursing agency. They sent someone over to make sure he was cared for. They took care of their nurse, and then I called vulnerable adults and made a report. So things like that happen. So take care of yourself. Call in, like if you're on a bender, like don't go to the mall. Not okay. We don't want to deal with that either. It happens, like scary. And I just want to like cry for him because he's so panicked. I'm like, really? Really? Okay. So that's my experience.
We always notify the physician too.
Yes. Yes. We will take care of that. Yes. Thanks. That's a good point. So we won't take a lot of time, but can parents drink in their home? Can they drink in excess?
As long as they're not going to be caring for their child.
Right, right. So if somehow there's behaviors that are affecting you caring for the child, that becomes an issue. But yes, parents live at home, they can drink, they can do their thing. So what about if you're with them in the car and either the child you're working with or a child with you is wearing a seatbelt?
Educate.
How would you do that?
Well, I actually had this happen. The parent.
A lot of people have this happen.
Hopped in a taxi with the baby, and I was like, "Well, we need a car seat." They're like, "Nope." So I'm like, "Okay, well, it's Minnesota law." They're like, "Nope." Okay, let's go.
Okay, so yeah, super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You can let them know that you're a mandated reporter. It's unsafe. We will have to report. A lot of times that will make them comply right there. So if you're seeing any situation, use your voice. Like stand up and say, "This is not safe. I'm a mandated reporter. Like, can you please take care of this?" You know, I mean, depending. But it's okay to speak up and say something and advocate for the kid that you're working with.
In that situation, I have heard that also the nurse should refuse to accompany the parent. Is that correct?
It could be.
What we would hope is if you say that, they'll make some other arrangement. You know, if you're in a situation where they won't, and now you'd be riding in the car with this child, you know, you can call in and ask for advice, say, you know, hopefully we could influence them, this child can't ride in there unattended. On the other hand, if the kid's sick and you're on your way to bring them into the ER, you know, they're gray areas, but we'd let them know, we're going to make a report on this because this isn't safe, for sure, but.
So it's not black and white either way.
Well, it would depend on
It's
how,
not a certain-
what's the risk of harm to the child that you're supposed to be helping transport,
But
but.
in that situation, where would you then decide to call an ambulance for transport versus unsafe transport?
What I would do at that point, I mean, obviously, if the child's critical crump and you're calling an ambulance anyway, call the office. Get some support on how should I handle this situation. So I would just be hopeful they'd find another arrangement. If you say, you know what, if you take this kiddo in here and he's not strapped in, I'm gonna have to report you. Hopefully. that
And then
will-
it's really about like, you know, after that situation, you can talk about that was really uncomfortable, make a plan, make, you know, an agreement of what needs to happen for future rides. So other items to consider quickly, again, leave the home if you're in danger. Report what you see and what you assess. I'm not asking for anybody to do any investigation. Don't go and be like, oh, I wonder if they're sexually abused, or, you know, like, look at these new signs. Like, don't do that. It's just really about like when you're doing your assessment, if something's coming up, what we're looking for. And we're not looking to get the parents in trouble. We want to make sure our patient is safe. This is, I forgot to mention, if something's happening with a child in the home that you're not taking care of and you're seeing, we're mandated reporters for them too. It's not just about the kid you're taking care of. So if there's an issue, let us know. Same rules.
And we have an expectation that as case managers, when you open a case, you're communicating this to every case you open. So no surprises at the time it happens, at the time we open the case. We're letting families know we are mandated reporters. So if our nurses ever, you know, see things like this, they would need to make a report.
What kind of questions you guys did good about asking during it, but any other ones?
I have an odd question.
Yeah.
Family going on an outing, they're comfortable putting way too many people in a vehicle, but they always make sure the nurse had a seat belt and a seat. The child that I'm caring for is in a car seat, and everyone else is piled like way too many people, and they're behind me. Do I just still go?
Is it adults or kids?
A variety. They just keep piling in.
It's so
You
hard.
can't turn around,
Yeah,
you don't know what's
yeah.
back there.
Yeah. I mean, it's really up to your discretion, I would say.
I mean, my main thing is the child I'm assigned to, and they know that, and so they always got that squared.
Yeah. I mean, all the children should be buckled in. I've been in those situations too.
Well, we had a similar maybe kind of thing recently with somebody transporting people in a van, and there were kids in the van who weren't strapped in, but the patient and the nurse was, but it was reported to us after the fact, and we're actually meeting with the mom tomorrow, and we're going to discuss that can't happen again because we're mandated reporters. So maybe it'd be the kind of thing where, like she's saying, use your judgment, you know, be upfront, really, you know, state law says that children have to be strapped in, and
That
you put,
every passenger has to be strapped in.
so.
Our concern is
Yeah,
children.
the children. And that we are mandated reporters, and yeah, that's what I was going to finish with. Children need to be strapped in, and we're mandated reporters, and if children are at risk, we have to report it, putting you in a really bad place. Sometimes you can do it, you know, more, I'm working with you, but you're just putting me in a bad place here. I've got a nursing license, I count on this job, and technically I gotta report you if you do this, you know, and see if you can be like collaborative with them. Say, I don't have a choice, what could we do, you know, and do your best, and if they don't listen to you like the time Jamie had, then contact us, and then at that point, somebody from the office is gonna follow up with them and say, hey, you can't do this again, so.
I mean, with the law, adults get to choose. It's about the kids, so that's what we're concerned about.
The specific law, though, is any vehicle that is capable of transporting 16 or less passengers must have all passengers securely fastened in their own seatbelt.
And that might be good for our case, our mandated reporting is the children. And if the adults don't strap in, maybe they get a fine if that's not our problem.
But, yeah.
Kids can't make the decision. You know, the important thing is as a child, you're not the one who's making the decision.
Okay, any other questions?
You guys have any situations in the home ever that you consider reported or shouldn't have?
I manage a home that I was actually a nurse for, and my first couple shifts in the home, it's like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And in that one, it's interesting because mom was in the process of learning parenting, and so even though the things going on in the home appeared reportable and probably were, she was already involved in parenting classes. We got lots of counseling from Monica and kind of,
She's made a huge
oh my gosh,
change.
yeah.
It's fun
But
to
it's
see those parents.
Scary and hard when you see this mom parent the way she parents, because she's parenting the way she was parented, doesn't fully understand why she's getting things coming down on her that her mom did to her all the time and worse. And but sometimes it is like Monica was saying, it's a collaborative thing. And even though your first couple times in the home, I have to report this. Sometimes you do, so run it by the people in the office. But sometimes parents are also in the process of learning better ways. So it's not.
And it might be a way that you wouldn't do, but it doesn't mean that it's not okay. So that's, you know, we're not doing it based on, you know, like, oh, I don't like you, or I don't like the way you parent, I would never do it. That's not what it's about.
And there are a lot of those
Right.
where it's like, oh, you know, that's not right. You know, even slapping. I mean, you know, I really cringe if I'm in a home and someone slaps a child. But I think Wendy's perspective is a good one to bring up because, you know, that's a particular home. We never did file a report, but I know that there was a period of time where the case manager and I met with her weekly, the mom, and you were meeting with her at least weekly. And you know, the success story in that home isn't just the child, it's the mom, the strides that person made.
They're my favorite. I mean, like, you're like, ah, you know, and then you, like, now it's like, yes, like, what I do matters. Like, it works. And for all of us.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, if I've seen something and I'm not sure it's reportable and I call the case manager, she says, thanks for telling me, I'll document it, but you don't need to report. My license is clear. If something comes up later and they say, why didn't you report it? By reporting to my case manager, I've reported it?
Yes,
Yeah.
you reported it, so now
Okay.
PHS is on the line, but you did what you were
Okay,
supposed to
I just
do.
want to make sure.
Yeah. And that's actually, we've had nurses from other agencies who have shared that there have been situations where they've just been told by their agency not to report. We're hearing them secondhand after the fact, but based on what they told us, we would have reported, but.
We're definitely, I mean, I have a license too, you know, and it's much easier to make a call, make a report, do the paperwork. Or they might not take it, like we talked about before. It's easy, just call, yeah. But you don't do that
If
personally.
you disagree, you can still call and report it.
Yeah.
Because I've talked to other nurses who don't work for PHS who like have walked into obviously reportable situations and they call the agency and the agency says, like when I in the interview, they're like, what's the worst situation you've ever had come up? And they tell me about the situation. They're like, yeah, I called and they said it was fine. And you're like, no, that's not fine. And they're like, but I still called and reported it. That's, you know, so it's still on, you can still report it.
I'd say for PHS or report.
We usually report, but yeah.
Yes, we always err on the side of doing what is both right, but also legal and appropriate, et cetera. So it's probably not very often you're gonna run into, probably never, a situation
Yeah.
like that, but you know, absolutely, you can do what your heart tells you.
And
And
you
what
have a voice
professional,
here, so
yeah.
if you disagree with us, speak up. It's respected. In a respectful manner. All right. Oh,
Quick question.
yeah.
As far as like emotional abuse goes,
Yeah.
do we see a lot of like investigations going on with that? Because a lot of times you walk into a home and it's like parents fight all
Yeah.
the time and it's a lot of yelling and like, what's the side of like reportable emotional abuse?
Like, is the child a part of it?
No.
They can hear it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if they're more like thrown into it and it's more abusive in that way, then it would be a concern. With our parents, emotional abuse, I can only imagine is, I mean, our parents are so stressed out, especially when they're first discharging a child from home. Like, that's okay. Like, this is, I can't even imagine being in that situation and having a nurse listen to that. So we don't report it as much because it's more of a situational thing. But if they like brought the child in there, like you gotta listen to this or listen to what your dad's saying or your mom's saying, then that would be more concerning. If they're like forcing.
So where you
them
go
to
with
listen to it.
concerning, I'll tell you, we do have a home right now, that the mom unfortunately shares way too much with the child. She's a young adult child, she's not a 4-year-old. You know, we've not deemed it's reportable, but, you know, goes in there and she's complaining about other relatives, this or that, and it's like, what are you putting this stress on this little 14-year-old who's got way too much on her plate already for, and it drives me nuts, and, you know, those aren't conversations you need to have, but to me, and you can tell me if you disagree, you know, it's not really something we can report. It's partly cultural. You know, my daughter worked with an after-school program in an area once that was definitely people of a different culture than she grew up with, and she was shocked. You won't believe how they talk to their kids, you know, and just. But would you have disagreed with that?
No, I agree. I mean, you're taking a situation to account as well. But, yeah. Yeah, I mean, emotional abuse is hard to report
Right.
in general. I'm not gonna say we won't ever do it, but I haven't. All right, thanks for coming, everyone. Let me know if you have questions.
Monkey did a great job. Thank you very much.